guys, my name's Julie. I work over at the community center and I'm also a portrait photographer. I've been a photographer for about 20 years since we're all at home now because of quarantine, and there's all these wonderful moments that are kind of going by, like graduations, weddings, communions, showers, and we were thinking that it might be a good idea to make a video to show you guys how to take more professional photos at home. All the shots today were taken on a iPhone XR, but basically any phone will do. Hopefully this will give you guys access to document these special moments that are still happening even though the quarantine's going on. Let's get started. So tip number one is clean your lens. One thing that we all kind of overlook is how dirty our lenses can get. We're putting these things in our pocket, leaving them out on the table. So if you have a microfiber cloth, I have probably 20 of these. I don't know where they came from, but they're in every room of my house. Go ahead and clean your lens off before you start to take any photos. If there's something stuck on there, it can dramatically affect your photos. Tip number one, make sure your camera lens is clean. Tip number two is choosing your background. This is something that a lot of times if you're not a photographer, you don't really think about because you're looking at the people in the photo and you're kind of focusing on, are they smiling? Are they looking at the camera? Until you go back and you look at that image that was captured and you're like, oh man, I wish that garbage can wasn't there. I wish that tree branch wasn't sticking out of their head. Finding a really good background can make all the difference in the world. So in this photo of my son, he is just standing in the driveway, and then I looked over at my garage and I noticed that, you know, this could be a really cool background. So I had him go over by the garage. I cropped it in pretty tight, and honestly, it looks like a background that I would have purchased to photograph someone in front of. It just makes so much difference to really capture the person and putting them up against something a little closer. Also, this other photo that I took of my daughter against the fence, just kind of zooming out with her against the fence. It's great. It's a full body picture of her and it captures my daughter, but when I zoom in and I focus on her and I crop some of that fence out, I get rid of some of that harsh shadows from the sun by putting her in the shade. And I focus more on her and who she is by zooming in just a little bit more and having that nice background. This other photo of my son by a tree, this is our garden area. So I just took him out in the garden, took a picture of him by the tree. Well, if I went around the other side of the tree and I took a closer up picture of him, I eliminated all of that noise around him, all of those things kind of poking out from all different directions, and just kind of, again, focused on him, used the tree as part of the background, blurred the rest of the background, and it just made for a really great portrait. You can do this with multiple people too. It's not just about having one person in a photograph, but just, again, taking a couple extra minutes, walking around, seeing what your options are, and maybe even having people stand in front of things to kind of see, you know, how is this end result going to be, and is it going to, you know, add to this photograph or take away from it? So tip number three is use natural light. I know a lot of people want to turn lights on in their home when they take pictures, or they want to use a flash. Do not use a flash. There are benefits to using a flash, I guess, in certain situations, but when you're trying to take a nice portrait of somebody, you definitely want to use natural light. So what that means is if you're photographing someone in the house, bring them over by a window, open it wide up. If you're outside, look for shaded areas that will still light somebody's face, but isn't going to give them a dramatic shadow. Two great times to photograph outside especially is at sunrise and sunset. You may not always be out in the morning or at night towards sunset to photograph people in these best lighting situations. So if you're out in the middle of the day, one thing you should always think to do is get the people you're photographing into the shade. You won't have harsh shadows on their face from, you know, the sun being above them. Here's a few examples of what I did with my own kids. So pictures of them in front of our fence, not being shaded, and then just taking a couple steps back into the shade, and how different that made the photo look and how more professional it looks just by changing that lighting. There's also some of my daughter inside our house, and all I did was open the front door, let the light in, And I was able to capture some beautiful photos. And I even liked the background. It was just our front door. I also had her sit in a chair right in front of a window, and I was able to just get some just beautiful photos, just using the light that exists out in the world. Tip number 4 is proper clothing. Make sure, dad comes out and even though he has a nice shirt on, he may not see his jeans, make sure everybody has the right thing to wear. It is going to make a difference in the long run. You really should take the time if you're going to try to take some more professional photos of your kids, or say it is a really special day. There's a ton of tips that I can tell you just specifically on clothing itself, but definitely make sure it's appropriate for what you want to do the photos for. Another thing within that is, hair, makeup, anything that you're going to need adjusted. It's always better to do it as you're taking the photo. So if you see a hair out of place or you see somebody's makeup is running, don't wait to do that to edit after, because it's very hard to do those things on your phone. So if you can run in there and, wipe your cheek or move that hair, that makes a huge difference as you're taking the photos. Tip number 5 is composition. How you see a photograph and how your eye kind of leads to the subject in it. All those things matter, especially when it comes to a professional portrait. Some of the photos that I've taken, I tried to use like the patterns in the background for your eye to lead into, my kids. There is a grid option on your phone, and I didn't even have mine turned on until I started doing this, and I'm kind of like, why haven't I done this yet? It's kind of amazing. You can have it on when you go to take photos, and the rule of thirds is a big thing for any kind of art, but basically placing your subjects in the thirds of where that is, that grid, it's gonna just make it more pleasing to the eye, and it's gonna make for a great photo. Here's a few photos of where I off-centered my kids, but I did it purposely. There's just something more interesting about a photo if it's not just always right in the middle of the picture. And I know a lot of people, they want to put their kid right in the middle, or all 3 people, all 4 people, and just have them centered. And that shouldn't always be the case. Even with a group of people, you could have them off to the side. Photographing people, especially if it's just one person, one of the things is you really want to see their eyes and their expression. So zoom in on the people. We forget sometimes, and I know we want to capture like how big our kids are and how much they've grown, and you want to get everything, but when you want a portrait in your house, something that you're going to save forever, you definitely want to see that person's face. You want to see their eyes. And so zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and do it with your feet, not a digital zoom. You're going to lose quality if you zoom in digitally. So walk closer, especially if you're using a phone. Get closer to the subject, and that will lead to a great photo. Tip number 6 is make sure your photos are in focus. You wouldn't think this would be so much of an issue right now because of everything being digital and all the apps to help us out. But every once in a while, when I scroll through my own photo roll, I notice that there's some photos that are out of focus. There's a few things that can help you with that. If you decide where you want to focus in a photo, you can hold that down and lock that. All you have to do is bring up your photo app, focus on the photo, hold it down, and you'll see a yellow box. And so during that time where you're holding it down, you can move your camera a little bit, and it will lock in that area if you want to adjust where you're taking the photo from, and it will lock in that area you want to focus on. One other thing I want to mention that might seem kind of silly is how do you hold your phone when you go to take a photo? Some people want to just hold it or balance it with one hand and then push with their other finger to, capture the photo. And while you're doing that, your phone's moving, and so you're capturing motion, which ultimately is making for a bad photo. A good idea is to kind of hold your phone like you would a camera. These buttons on the side, your volume buttons, you can also use the shutter buttons. Hold your phone with 2 hands. And so making it sturdy so that you have no motion and it's not going to blur your photo. You can also turn that vertically, hold it with 2 hands, and use your finger on the side of your phone. One other thing about your phone when it comes to taking a photo, you can also plug in your headphones, and you could actually take the photo with the button on your headphones. And if you have an iWatch, you can also use an app on the iWatch to take a photo too. So tip number 7 is get to know your photo modes. The phone that I took all of my photos on today were with a iPhone XR. A lot of the iPhones and Android phones, they have similar apps and modes that you can use. Portrait mode is one of the modes in the iPhone that I really like to use. It's come a long way. I shot all of the photos with the portrait mode turned on, and there's 3 different lighting scenarios in this mode. I highly suggest you using them. You can use them on multiple people. They don't work quite as well with probably groups over 2. However, on a portrait of one person, it can be a dramatic effect and really take it up to the next notch. Here are a few examples, and I do feel like there's a big difference as far as something that just looks like a candid photo and then something that, I might have paid somebody to take a picture of for me. When you do take some photos with that mode, it does make a huge difference in the quality of photo that you end up with. Tip number 8 is don't forget to edit your photo. I know our instincts right now are to take photos and just instantly upload them, but just take a few seconds. I probably crop every single photo I take. I also adjust the coloring or the contrast or the brightness, and there's so many things that you can adjust on a photo and make it just look a teeny bit better or a whole lot better. So all of those things are within your camera app, and you can also download apps to edit photos, but I use the ones just on the phone, and that's all I used when I took these photos. And so I'm going to show you a few examples of what some of these photos look like before I edited them, as far as when I cropped in, I changed the filter on them or the lighting, I increased the contrast, the brightness, and I really feel like there was a big difference. And if I would have just uploaded the original photo I had, I just don't think it would be as good as the end photo. Tip number 9 is don't forget to store your images. If you've taken all this time to create a really amazing photograph, don't just leave it on your phone. Where are you going to keep that long term? I've heard horror stories about people's phones being stolen or lost, and they've lost every photograph that they've taken. I highly suggest you guys find a place to store your images. I use Google Photos myself, and so everything that I take on my phone is instantly uploaded, and it is free of charge. And I know there's tons of other services out there where people can look into and have access to, but I highly recommend storing your photos so that you have a permanent place for them to be. I also suggest people printing their photos. I still print photos of my kids and my family. I have quite a few photo books, but it does come in handy. The kids will have projects that they need a photo for, or you want to switch out a frame and you don't have any photos around the house because you haven't printed anything in years, or maybe you do lose your phone and you forgot to store your photo and you don't have any record of anything. So there are tons of sites out there too where you could easily upload your photos and have them printed. So ultimately this whole video is about you capturing professional images, and I would love to have you guys be able to then print those out and have those same images on your wall. So don't forget to do those things so you will always have access to them. So tip number 10 is have fun. At the end of the day, you don't want kids to be crying and stressed out because you've made them sit and smile for 3 hours to get that one great shot. Sometimes it's not possible, and that's okay. I also found that some of those moments where, these kids, maybe they don't want to smile, but they want to be goofy, or they just want to be themselves. Capturing those moments are just as important. As you can see in some of these examples that I have, where I had moments throughout the day when I was photographing my kids that I just let them be silly. I let my son go on the trampoline. They made silly faces at me. We stopped, we took breaks. Have them take the lead. And if they want to just play and you're capturing those moments as they play, follow their lead. Let people be comfortable and let them be themselves. Don't worry about posing people perfectly because life isn't perfect. Capture things as they are, and I think you'll be a lot happier with the result.